Okay, so I think we can get started, everyone. So thank you all for joining us this afternoon. So today, the focus of our conversation will be on green tech. So my name is Bob Gallagher. I'm the co-chair of the British Chamber Digital Tech Group and CEO and founder of digital consultancy Absinthe, and joined by the other DTG members. So we have Gareth Davies, who's partner and CTO at DDX, and also chairman of the British Chamber, and we have Drew, who's founder and chief customer officer at Make. And we have our special guests today. We have James Moore, who is CEO of Wave Exponential, PCL, and Nattinee, Dora, who is CEO of Thrive Venture Builder. And perhaps we can just start by giving our kind of special guests a quick minute each to introduce yourselves and share a little bit about your experience in this space.
Fantastic. I guess I'll go first. So first of all, thank you so much, Bob, for the opportunity to really shed some light on this topic. I think just a brief introduction to myself. So my name is James Moore. I'm the CEO of Wave Exponential and also Wave BCG. I think for today's topic, I'll just introduce Wave BCG. We are a climate solutions company. So we provide consulting services to companies within the listed stock exchange and also a wide range of different clients, helping them to really decarbonize their entire operations within Thailand and overseas as well. We are project developers for projects that can generate carbon credits, such as forestry projects, sustainable agriculture, EV, and etc. We also are very active in trading of carbon offsets and also IREX. So we help companies source and offset their emissions through the use of carbon credits, and also help in terms of climate tech as well. A bit about my background is that I've been in consulting for the past 10 years, mostly at PwC and also Deloitte in Australia, focusing a lot on sustainability strategies for companies within Thailand and also within the region as well. Just a short and brief introduction from myself. I think I'll pass it on to Dora.
Thank you, James. So hi, everybody. My name is Dora, and currently I run a company called Thrive Venture Builder. So at Thrive, what we do is, I think very similarly, but not so much in the carbon credit space. So we help organizations in Thailand look at how they can shift into doing things a little bit more sustainably, but mainly through creating new innovations within their organization. So typically helping organizations create new S-curves, or lately also helping them look at the concept of creating circularity within the products that they have within their organization. So those are the two mains. And we also co-create companies with other companies as well. But when I talk about sustainability, for us, it's more of a focal point on sustainability and the concepts of sustainable development goals. So also looking at a broader concept more than just ESG. So looking at in more of how can they also help the communities around them, or increase their value chains in different ways to touch upon communities as well. So that's what we do at Thrive. And my background is more from the startup side of things. So I've been working in the startup space in Thailand for nearly 10 years now, and also from the social entrepreneurship side of things. So that was where I was before I jumped into the startup space here in Thailand. And startup focus prior to this was mainly in the education space. But now my newfound love, as you can probably see from my background that I've blurred, is actually in the agriculture space right now. So I'm doing a lot in the regenerative agriculture space all around Thailand. So yeah, that's me. Nice to meet you all today.
Well, yeah, thank you both so much for joining us. And as usual, for the format of this, it's open for questions. So it's really a Q&A session. We've gathered some questions in advance, but any questions you guys have, please just drop them into the chat, and we can read them out and go through those. But we can start with some of the questions that we gathered in advance. So maybe for yourself, Dora, to begin with. So we're seeing that sustainability has become really a mega trend, both globally and locally. So as someone who's been working in this space for several years, what's your view on the current state of green tech in Thailand?
Yeah, so I think the current state of green tech in Thailand, I feel there is definitely a lot more to do. So that means the good side of things is there's a lot of opportunities that are available. I think having worked in this space for now close to 5 years, I think this is a very good time right now because 5 years ago, I remember I was talking to a lot of different people about, sustainability, and they were all kind of like, I don't really get it. And the group of people that were interested were very small, but I think it really took off last year with more and more companies being aware, especially I think in the side of things that James was working on in the concepts of decarbonization. I think that's really taken off. I I think everybody here is familiar with COP, and I felt that before 2023, barely anybody ever spoke about COP at all in Thailand. And now everybody is talking about COP and going to COP and really trying to get involved in seeing what they can do for the future. So I think it looks very promising, but there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. Previously, I think a lot of the green technologies in Thailand were more in the recycling space because that is kind of where the larger corporations had their focus on. So there were a lot of trying to streamline the waste supply chain or look at how you can recycle plastics better. But I think now the shift has shifted more, especially with all the pledges that all the different companies have done, I think in the past year as well. So I think, yeah, it'll be an interesting to see what will happen in the next couple of years. I think on my side a little bit more as well, it's great to see a lot of people kind of jump into the decarbonization side of things, but I think it's also very important that we remind ourselves that when we talk about sustainability, it's not only about decarbonization as well. So we need to take a look at other things that are not just about reducing the carbon, that decarbonizing. And also, I think the word decarbonization sometimes gets us a bit focused on just carbon dioxide, but in reality, there's so much more than that as well. So I think it will be an interesting space still, and still lots to do. Especially I think in Thailand where the agriculture is such a big aspect, in other social issues that we have around Thailand, like poverty and so forth, like that's also such a big aspect that really you can find really interesting business models to kind of like work it in together. So yeah, that I think is cool.
And you mentioned COP, just for those who don't know, can you explain what that is?
Yeah, so COP is where I think the latest one this year was in the Middle East. It's where, all the I would say like a Davos, the World Economic Forum for decarbonization. It's where all the large companies convene, get together and discuss about what the next steps for, trying to achieve our climate change goals would look like. And there's a lot of controversial things, I think, especially this year that has happened in COP. I think just search COP controversy, and I think there'll be an endless stream of things that you can read about in that as well. And I think yeah, so I would say it's a stage for people to talk about decarbonization, but as with everything in the world, you kind of need to also be aware of both sides of it, right? Like sometimes they will be able to do what they do, but sometimes I think a lot of the really large stages in the world, if we're really talking about sustainability, it's often used as a place to really greenwash certain, companies. And I think we can spend another 1 hour talking about greenwashing, but you need to search that up as well so that you understand that. And I think we can talk about that a little bit later as well, because I think for companies would be exporting your goods over to Europe, like now that's a big issue in Europe as well, that they don't really want like companies that are greenwashing to be sending stuff or operating so much in Europe. Yeah.
Well, I think then that probably leads us nicely into kind of the bit more of the context of what kind of pressures now Thai companies are facing in becoming more sustainable. And I think this, James, you prepared a couple of slides on a couple of these questions that we had in advance, so maybe can give this one to you yourself. So yes, what are kind of the pressures that Thai companies are facing, and then how does the legal landscape impact that? And also kind of sharing what process should companies go through when starting to plan their decarbonization strategy.
Sure. I think I'm sharing my screen at the moment. I'm not sure if you can see my screen. Is it showing?
Not yet.
Not yet.
I think there might be something with the settings. I'm not sure if you're able to share from your side, Bob.
Okay. Okay, give me a moment.
Sure. I think I'll start with saying that I totally agree with what Dora mentioned, that it's not only about decarbonization, but obviously this is the mandate of many different companies at the moment. You still need to take into consideration the other sustainability aspects, right? So it's not just focusing on the E portion, but also not forgetting the S and G, right? So I think this is what really ties everything in together. When it actually comes to pressures faced by companies, not only in Thailand, but around the region, it is more a conversation regarding competitiveness, right? So we're starting to see that companies that fail to adapt or really fail to decarbonize and have a clear roadmap in order to do so are being less able to compete on a global stage. And that's due to many different factors, such as increase in product prices after been faced with carbon taxes and etc. And I think the key mandate for many companies, especially that are listed in the stock exchange, is that firstly, they want to make sure that their profits do not decrease because of climate change, but also they also are looking to explore different opportunities to identify new revenue streams from climate tech, and also venturing into new spaces when it comes to climate and technology. I think when we talk about the pressures faced by companies, we can really categorize this into three different levels. Firstly, at a global level, I think everyone is aware of COP26, or I hope they are aware of COP26, which essentially means that every country that is involved will have a pledge, right? So they'll have a pledge for their 2030 targets, their carbon neutral, and also their net zero emissions targets. What this actually means is that these pledges will cascade down to companies. So companies now will also have to try to make their own pledges that align to their different countries and help the countries really achieve these climate targets. Seeing that the whole world's supply chain is sort of intertwined, this causes a lot of pressure along the supply chains as well, which leads on to the second level of pressure, which is regional pressure. We have CBAM, which is the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism by Europe, which means that if you are exporting goods into Europe and your emissions from those products actually exceeds the ceiling that they have capped, you will have to be paying what they call a CBAM certificate, which is essentially paying a penalty on exceeding the limit that they have capped. So this means that before, as Thailand is a manufacturing company, our prices for products might have been relatively low compared to competitors in Europe. But if we do not decarbonize within our own offices, that means that our prices may not be as competitive anymore. Not only is CBAM an issue at the moment, but the CCA, which is the Clean Competition Act of the US, is something that is under drafting at the moment. So this could also affect. But the key thing, the key area that we try to explain to our clients is that it's not only CBAM or the US, but since the US and Europe has started these carbon taxes, different countries in around the region will also start to draft their own carbon tax. Thailand is also currently drafting their own carbon tax by the excise department at the moment. So this is something that we would need to keep a close eye on. Another issue is in terms of supply chain. What we start to see at the moment is that when you really look at a company's carbon or greenhouse gas emissions, it's segregated into three different scopes. There's direct emissions, which is your scope 1. There's your scope 2, which is the energy that you use from the grid. And there's scope 3, which is essentially your supply chain. A lot of leading companies in the world have already made their pledges, which means that they have a pledge to achieve by 2030. They will start to pressure their supply chains to also reduce. because if their supply chains reduce, they automatically also reduce their emissions as well. One key trend that we're starting to see in Thailand is a lot of Thai companies are starting to become disqualified from the different vendor lists of leading companies around the world. We're also starting to see that there's pressures not only downstream in logistics, but also upstream in terms of more raw material sourcing and etc. So I think a lot of different companies have started to encompass, sort of having climate targets as part of their vendor qualifications as well. So it's a big issue when it comes to supply chain in Thailand. What we also start to see is that when companies try to raise funds, a lot of different key investors start to look for sort of these ESG sort of metrics. So a classic case would be BlackRock. BlackRock will not invest in companies if the ESG standards are not up to par with their expectations. So it will become more difficult for companies to fundraise if they do not adapt to climate change. We then move down to level 3, which is really internal and within Thailand. We start to see that the carbon legislation in Thailand is currently being drafted at the moment. So we expect to see this within the next few years. This means that companies that are not in compliance may face penalties and also find it hard to compete within Thailand space as well. We also see that in financing from financial institutions, the Bank of Thailand has issued a green taxonomy, which essentially means that companies that fail to adapt by 2040 will find it extremely difficult to access financing from the banks. The reason that this is because the scope 3 or the supply chain of banks is different to traditional companies. The financial institutions, they have a scope 3 of what is called financial emissions. So if I am a bank and I provide loans to a company that is in mining, that means that company's emissions will be counted in my scope 3 as well. So banks are also trying to reduce their scope 3 emissions through financial emissions. We also see that there's an increase in accessibility to green loans, sustainability-linked bonds, sustainability-linked loans. This is really to help companies to implement the different initiatives to decarbonize as well. And I think one thing that we have seen in Thailand is that the stock exchange and the SEC is making it mandatory for companies to disclose their carbon footprint within their sustainability reports and also in their one report. And also the key trend that we're starting to see in Thailand is that consumers care, right? So if before we see consumers, we might go into the 7-Eleven, we might look at the back of the product labels to see what the calories are. In Europe, we're starting to see a bigger trend, which is they're starting to see which products emit the most. So they'll make their decisions based on low carbon products. This is a key trend that we're starting to see in Thailand at the moment.
Great, thanks, James. So I guess the second part of that question was around the legal landscape.
Yep. I think I've prepared this slide just to show you that, Thailand, we are in a voluntary market. However, we will be starting to shift towards a mandatory market. And just for those of you that are unaware, voluntary market means that you can either meet the pledge or you can reduce your footprint. Nobody's going to penalize you. But in a mandatory market, if you're unable to sort of keep within the realms of what the legislation sort of states, there's high likelihood that you will become penalized as well. So I've really provided you with a slide to understand the legal landscape in Thailand. And this is something that many companies are trying to really navigate around. And it's still in the early stages, but we're starting to see different areas within legislation start to become drafted and also being announced very soon. I'll start with the Department of Climate Change and Environment. The Department of Climate Change and Environment are currently in the process of approving their Climate Change Act, which essentially means that they will start to place a cap on high emitting companies in Thailand and also high energy consumption companies. If in the future you exceed this ceiling or this cap that they have placed, then you will likely pay a fine as well. And also in terms of the EIA for sort of factories in around Thailand, they are mandated to disclose their carbon footprint. And if they fail to do so, there might be some issues with their licenses as well. The TGO in Thailand, the Thailand Greenhouse Gas Management Organization, really looks after the Thailand voluntary carbon credits called TVER, Thailand Voluntary Emission Reductions. And they are also providing advice to many different companies on how they can decarbonize and really reduce their footprint. So they're really playing a role to help companies adapt to the changing environment within Thailand. The Bank of Thailand has already launched their green taxonomy. So the green taxonomy really is to make sure that everyone is speaking the same language. So what is a clean industry? What is an unclean industry? Many banks have started to create what they call a negative and a positive list. Negative list is, sort of high fossil fuel consuming or high emitting type industries. They will start to phase out of those sort of loans and move more towards the positive list, which is around greener industries, right? We also see that the Bank of Thailand has issued the green taxonomy, which also means that by 2040, it will become very difficult for companies to access financing if they have failed to adapt. The Thai Revenue Department has also started to provide tax incentives on different projects that support the green economy. The tax exemption that they have released is in regards to tax based on the sales of carbon credits. So any capital gains tax from the sales of carbon credits will become waived by the Thailand Revenue Department. And I think they will have a few more different sort of tax incentives in the future. So they're really playing the role as the good cop at the moment. The Excise Department is also in collaboration with the Customs Department to draft our own carbon tax. It is very likely that the carbon tax in Thailand will target the similar industries as CBAM of Europe. So the 7 industries from steel to aluminium to fertilizer, cement, hydrogen, and energy. This is so that we collect tax from companies within Thailand before they export into Europe, because the tax differentiation is quite substantial at the moment. This is, I believe, will be launched within the next 2 years. So we're keeping a close eye on this as well. I think a lot of international companies that also have BOI licenses are also able to obtain sort of tax incentives or tax holidays. So if you have a BOI license, firstly, if you are looking to bring in green technology such as new processing machinery and etc. that is designed to reduce emissions, there's a 3-year tax holiday on machinery such as this, and also including sort of carbon absorbing tech as well. Another incentive for companies that have BOI licenses is that if they want to partake in projects that are reducing carbon, such as forestry projects or sustainable agriculture projects, if the value is over 5 million, they will also obtain tax incentives on those as well. When we speak about the stock exchange and the SEC, I think I mentioned this earlier, that they are mandated to disclose their carbon footprint within their reports. But this is only for scope 1 and scope 2. We have yet been mandated to sort of calculate and disclose our scope 3 emissions, because that is where the majority of the emissions are. Up to 80-90% of a company's emissions is usually in their scope 3. We also start to see that there's the Department of Trade and Negotiations. So this is really to liaise with different carbon taxes around the world, such as CBAM and the CCA in the US, really to negotiate the terms and make sure that this is fair for companies in Thailand. And we also start to see a lot of movement from the Federation of Thai Industries. There's the Thailand Carbon Neutral Network and the RE100 in Thailand, really helping to support companies in their transition when it comes to energy and decarbonization. So I think in a nutshell, that is what the legal landscape in Thailand currently looks like. We will be moving from voluntary to mandatory, but we will probably operate as a hybrid model in the first phase until we reach around the 2030 milestone of Thailand.
Right. Thank you, James. And then I think you had one more slide. So this is on the question of what process should companies go through when starting to plan their decarbonization strategy?
Sure. So I think decarbonization strategy, as Dora mentioned, it's not just carbon. I totally agree. A lot of people seem to think it's only carbon. There's a wide range of greenhouse gases. What I prepared for you is sort of the key steps in which companies take. This is not, there's no one size fits all, but this is essentially what we see happening within Thailand, right? So what we see is that a lot of companies have been talking about carbon credits. How do they buy carbon credits? How do they offset carbon credits? But they really do not even understand their own company's footprint. So it's similar to going to the hospital and requesting for cholesterol medication when you really don't even know what's wrong with yourself, right? So I think the first step for companies is really to understand their baseline or their base year. So they will have to measure and understand their carbon footprint for the organization and also the carbon footprint for the products, especially the ones that they will export overseas, that may become subject to carbon tax. Once they have an understanding of their carbon footprint that is verified, they will then start to develop a gap analysis. So the carbon footprint of the organization will show companies where emissions occur. So what essentially are the hotspots? It might be from energy consumption if you're in manufacturing, it might be in logistics if you're a logistics company, but it's really to identify where are the hotspots and how can we decarbonize and reduce emissions from these different hotspots. So companies will start to develop a gap analysis. The gap analysis will look at the hotspot. It will look at the initiatives or projects that can reduce emissions from these hotspots, but also look at the investments, the payback periods and return on investments, if any. But most importantly, they will look at the estimated emission reductions. So once they have this gap analysis, this really is a foundation for them to access green financing to finance these different initiatives. Once they have completed the gap analysis, they will start to prioritize the different investments, because obviously you cannot do everything within the 1-2 year period. You will have to sort of phase this out all the way up until your key milestones. So companies will start to develop what we call a strategy for investment as well. So once they really understand themselves, they understand what they need to do, they will start to draft a blueprint. A blueprint, which is commonly called a decarbonization journey, is really to take these different proposals and phase this out over time, because you probably cannot implement everything straight at one time, right? You need to really phase this out. So once they have that decarbonization journey, they will start to map this to their targets and their KPIs. Many companies say they want to be carbon neutral by 2026, or what do I need to do to be net zero by 2025? It's a very unrealistic and fluffy target. So what they need to do is really to look at the gap analysis and develop targets based on the company's sort of capacity and realistically what they can achieve within those different years. So they'll start to draft their 2030 targets, they'll start to draft their carbon neutral targets and their net zero emissions targets, and then cascade those KPIs down to the different BUs within the organization. So once they have the targets in place, they will start to support their supply chain. In supporting the supply chain, there's really two ways you can go about it, right? The first way is that you can uplift your policies, so you make it more difficult to become a vendor of your company. So you can say, if you do not have a carbon footprint of your organization, you do not have any targets, KPIs, and clear roadmaps, then you cannot be part of our vendor list. This is more of a stricter approach that companies in the Western world have started to adapt. But in Thailand, since the majority of our supply chain is either contract farmers or SMEs, we cannot really do that. So a lot of companies we start to see will start to sort of provide support along their supply chain. It could be helping their supply chain to decarbonize. Also, we see some companies providing carbon credits to their supply chain so that their companies within supply chain can actually reduce using carbon credits as well. And then after that, it comes to implementation and monitoring. So they'll actually start to implement these different projects and they'll start to monitor the emission reductions. And then once they've satisfied every single, sort of done everything they can do, they will start to set resources aside for offsetting. So I think one key word that we will start to hear more often is science-based target initiative. And this is an initiative that many companies have started to pledge against. Science-based target means that companies will need to do whatever they can to decarbonize and reduce their footprint before they start thinking about offsetting. So offsetting will usually be linked to KPIs. If companies are unable to achieve their KPIs in terms of emissions reductions, they will start to support projects that develop carbon credits and use carbon credits to offset their residual emissions, if you will. So that essentially, in a nutshell, shows you what companies in Thailand have been doing when it comes to their decarbonization strategy.
Awesome. Thank you very much, James. So now let me pass a question over to Dora. So I think you are maybe approaching a similar space, but in a different way. So maybe you can share, when you're consulting to companies about improving their sustainability. Yeah, can you explain a bit more your approach to supporting that innovation process?
Yes, perfect. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the question was regarding sustainability and how the consulting work with sustainability works. So I think personally for me, when I go in and look at an organization, typically it's looking at it on a strategic level first, because oftentimes when we're talking about sustainability initiatives, what often happens is if HR wants it or CSR wants it, but on a strategic level, it's not really there within the organization, and it makes it for really difficult to actually implement anything to actually happen on a more consistent scale. So that's typically even oftentimes, I think, coming from an innovation perspective nowadays, a lot of people will talk a lot about doing innovation workshops. And so oftentimes the reach out is actually from not the strategic level. Then it's jumping back and taking a look at it on a strategy level about what it is that they're interested in and where they are headed in the next couple of years. Once that is taken a look at, then we're looking at which parts within their strategy is it that they are struggling with, and then taking a look on how we can actually look at issues that are available in a sustainability sense, typically related to sustainable development goals, and see how that then can be tied in with what it is that they have issues with. So for example, one organization that we were talking to, they are a large organization working, doing outsourcing for blue collar workers. Now, when we are looking at blue collar work, then we said, what was the issue that they had? And they said the issue is, in a couple of years' time, the trends have shifted and changed. It's not possible anymore for them to continue just doing blue collar outsourcing. So what we did with them is actually created a new company that does trainings for blue collar workers to really upskill them to the next level. So this is, as I mentioned, looking at it more from a sustainable development goals perspective of how is it that when we talk about sustainability, it isn't only carbon, or it isn't only decarbonization, but it's all on the other aspects of the organization as well. So that's for sustainable innovations. That's how we typically work. Now, on another perspective, one thing that's actually been starting to take off quite a lot is the concept of circularity within an organization, because that's actually when we talk about doing things so that it's sustainable. One thing that we often forget is there's limited resources on the world, right? So even though we say I want us to be sustainable, but I want to sell more, I want to make more profits, sometimes it is not, it doesn't flow with each other. But when you think about it in a circularity perspective, how do you make your products more circular? Then that still allows you to generate more revenue over a period of time, but use less resources to actually make that happen. So with when we're doing circularity consulting, what you have to typically look at as you take your product and you look at the entire value chain first, so that you understand, where in which parts of the value chains are there losses and what opportunities are there to actually convert so that your company will actually be able to generate profits from this. And I think this is also an interesting perspective of doing it in Thailand, because I think it's the same in Thailand, even though, you know, now a lot more people are talking about sustainability. The sustainability role itself typically lands with the CSR department still. And oftentimes within CSR departments, they are still very used to the traditional way of sustainability that has been done over many, many years, which is it's more of we're doing something so that we can talk about it, but maybe not so much about we're doing something so that it can actually be integrated into strategy and then it can work for the long run. So with that in mind, when we are working to create things to make it more circular, one thing that's very important all the time is if it's not going to generate you extra revenue, or if it's not going to be cost effective, then don't do it. That's one thing that we often say. Oftentimes, though, we will still have, you know, things that don't really make sense in a financial sense, but people would want to do it to talk about it, which is fine as well. But if you really want sustainability to be sustainable, that's probably not the best way for you to configure all of that. So that's like the two main ways of working. And yeah, so as I mentioned, the circularity aspect of it, Thailand last year, with the organization that I work with, we probably trained close to 300 companies in understanding circular product designs. And I just came back from Vietnam, actually doing it for the Vietnam government as well. So you can see, I think in general, people are really starting to understand this a little bit more. But then when you compare it between Asia and Europe, the speed of execution is still very, very different, though, between executing in Europe. Like in Europe, we go in and we do the consulting work. A couple of days in, they're already calling their vendors to, you know, ask for shifts and changes. But I think in Thailand, a bit more understanding of circularity, a little bit more understanding of sustainability is also needed in all organizations to really allow for the change to occur as effectively as abroad.
Mhm. Cool. All right. Thank you, Dora. So, I mean, obviously, the pressure is mainly on, you know, large enterprises that are having the largest impact, and you know, especially in those kind of 7 industries that were mentioned. But you know, for the average, smaller, medium-sized business that's still interested to be, you know, playing their part and towards this, what kind of technology could be used to at least start to understand their own footprint? Question for either of you.
Thanks, Bob. I think you know, when it comes to smaller enterprises, the key challenge is really navigating carbon tax and also looking at your supply chain. So I think they'll start to feel a lot more pressure along the supply chain. Obviously, you know, calculating your carbon footprint and really decarbonizing your sort of processes does have significant costs to it. I think it's really understanding where the needs are, right? So I think if you are exporting overseas, it makes sense to find an international verifier. So an auditor in this space, such as Bureau Veritas, SGS, TÜV and some of these different companies, just to make sure that, you know, the first time you're doing it, you get it done properly, right? So I think that's a key for smaller enterprises. I think at a minimum, what companies would need is that they definitely would need a carbon footprint, and also make sure that this is aligned to international requirements as well. But also, you know, it's not just doing your footprint this year, but you have to keep monitoring your footprint as well. I think what we are starting to see is that there are a lot of new verifiers within Thailand. If you look at the TGO's website, there's a list of verifying bodies under the TGO, which are a cheaper alternative to the international verifiers. I think this should suffice for many different SMEs or smaller companies within Thailand. I think we also start to see a lot of different carbon accounting software being developed within Thailand itself. I believe that the TGO has one, the PEA has also launched one as well. I think these are affordable sort of solutions to companies that really want to measure and also monitor their carbon emissions throughout the years. There are also a few other sort of technologies or software that can be implemented. We are actually in the process of developing our own application, and that's really for behavioral change of employees. Software such as this will start to see become more prominent within the market. So software such as helping employees to calculate their own footprint so that companies can understand the emissions from their employees, providing incentives for them to partake in different green activities such as using public transportation, adopting use of EV vehicles, sort of doing more recycling and upcycling, and even going as far as their green procurement and staying in green hotels. I think these are some of the different initiatives when it comes to the tech that we'll start to see being rolled out within the country in the next couple of years as well.
Adding on to James as well. I guess this is more on an education for your employees, more than actually being able to fully calculate it. I'll post it into the chat group. So this is one website that I use quite a lot when I go and do trainings for organizations to get them to understand a little bit more, or when I work with university students. So it's called footprintcalculator.org, and then you can go in there and they have a series of questions that they ask you, and then you answer accordingly. And at the end of it, it'll tell you how many worlds, if everybody on the world lived like you, how many worlds we need in total. And so far, I've done this with a couple of different people, even people who are super conscious about everything, and they've ended up with 3 worlds. So that's a challenge for anybody out there. Maybe you can, jump in and try to work on this. And by understanding that, then they understand a little bit more regarding resource usage and so forth. So if any company is looking to kind of educate your employees a little bit more regarding all of this, this is a good website to use.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you, Dora.
Add on that point a little bit. I love that website, by the way, Dora. I use it quite regularly as well. So I think on the educational side, I think it's something that I missed, and I think it's something that is super important as well. So I think for companies that really want to make sure they stay up to date with everything that's happening within Thailand and even around the world when it comes to climate change, there are a few different resources out there that you can tap into as well. So under the Thailand Stock Exchange, there is a module that they have for free to really understand decarbonization, understand climate change. So you can have a look at the SET website. There's also a few courses going around that are not too costly, such as the energy transition courses offered by the Thai Federation of Thai Industries. And also you can also join Thai Carbon Markets Club. This is a club by Bangja, and they often provide updates on news and what's happening in Thailand. There's a network of people that ask questions in the group. So what they need to do to decarbonize, are there any software out there that's available? There's a lot of sharing that happens within that club as well. You can also join the TCNN, which is the Thailand Carbon Neutral Network. They will also provide you updates on what's happening within the landscape of Thailand, and also join RE100 Thailand. So if you follow those different sort of avenues for education, you should be quite well versed when it comes to climate change.
Awesome, thank you. And we have one question in the comments, and maybe James, you can speak about this because I think you touched on this as a requirement for set listed companies, but is there kind of a standard way for auditing kind of SCG or sustainability like the ISO for processes?
Yes, so if you are calculating your carbon footprint with international verifiers, so international verifiers such as SGS, Bureau Veritas, TÜV Nord, TÜV Rheinland, they're essentially the big 4 when it comes to accounting, right? They will often use the ISO standard. So it's ISO 14064/1. This is the most common practice that we see at the moment. But obviously, some companies will not need to go to this standard. They can just follow the standard of the TGO as well. The only difference is that for the ISO standard, they will segregate the different greenhouse gases, whereas the TGO, I believe they used to combine all the greenhouse gases together. but there might be some changes with the TGO or the Thailand Greenhouse Gas Organization standard as well.
Okay, thank you.
Just adding on as well, Bob, for that one, because I see it's a question regarding to the ESG standards for ISO as well. So for ESG, there's also an ISO for that, but I think the one that's most famous that most people use is GRI. So there's different auditors, similarly to carbon credits, there's different auditors for your ESG standards as well. So I think different companies pick and choose different auditors based on, you know, the industries that they're in. So that you can also take a look at that.
And Dora, I mean, we've spoken before about that a lot of Thai companies have over the years mainly focused on ESG and not so much on the sustainable development goals. I mean, maybe you can explain a little bit just the differences, and are you seeing that changing over recent years?
Yeah, so I think if I probably quote Paul Ark on this, I think he says it quite well. So the difference between ESG and SDG is when you're looking at ESG, like you have a company and you're trying to do less bad. That's what we usually say when we're looking at ESG. So do less bad. On the contrary, when we're talking about SDGs, it's how to do more good. Because ESG is, you know, you have a checklist where currently you're running your company a certain way, but they're saying you shouldn't run it a certain way. You should comply with these rules so that you're a little bit less bad when you're doing. So that's the perspective of it. Now, on the contrary, when we talk about SDG, Sustainable Development Goals, a lot of the times it won't really touch upon things that are in your ESG audits. So and I'll just go through it very quickly. So Sustainable Development Goals is something that was created by the UN actually a long time ago, but they've rebranded it back in 2015 to be Sustainable Development Goals. Before it was called, I think, Millennium Development Goals. And this is a joke I always talk with my students in university about. I was like, why do you think they rebranded it? You know, and everybody's like, because they didn't hit it. And I'm like, yeah, that's pretty much, you know, what happened. So hopefully we're at a different point in time in the world right now where we've rebranded Millennium Development Goals to be Sustainable Development Goals, and we will actually try to achieve these goals, right? So in total, there are 17 different goals altogether, and they look at what is actually needed for the world to survive, for the world to be sustainable. So we're not looking at it just in a perspective of your company is sustainable, because I think one thing that we often forget, and this might be like on a higher level, but you know, if the world doesn't survive, then your company won't survive either, right? So what is it that we need to do to really understand it on a bigger scale? Like, what do we need to make the world survive? And so a lot of the goals will touch upon, you know, things that the inequalities that we might see in society, for example, poverty, like lack of good education. I think Yapimam has the link down, so you can take a look at the Sustainable Development Goals. But on the second level, we talk about societal level, but then we also talk about an environmental level as well. So what we can do to make environment better, because you have to look after both, right? Society, but environment as well. So that's why I think we're starting to see more companies. Yes, they tick the ESG checkboxes, but then they also look at it from an SDG perspective of which SDG goals are they trying to, you know, make the linkage with their company to. And there's also what you can take a look at for the UN SDGs is there's actually an SDG annex as well. So if you search UN SDG annex up, what it has there, it has all the indicators and all the metrics of what each of the Sustainable Development Goals actually wants to achieve. And then by taking a look at that, then you are able to understand that a little bit more as well. And I think personally for me, the reason working on like sustainability from an SDG perspective is because oftentimes we don't realize that certain things such as education or poverty reduction, you know, seems like it's very far away from us right now, but it also has an impact on your company in the longer run, right? But unfortunately, things that often happen is we're looking at things on a shorter perspective, like maybe a couple of years. And of course, this is also due to, you know, I've had a conversation with my friend the other day, and we were talking about like, it's how often, you know, when the shareholders are in control, your CEO changes every couple of years, and then that's like you're resetting everything again. So you don't really have a really long roadmap for what it is that you're expecting to achieve over 10 to 20 years time. And so when you then don't look at making like SDGs something that's more important for the organization in the long run, and we keep on taking a look at these short-term goals for a long period of time, then 30 years down the line, we look up and we're like, oh dear, we're probably going to be in a space where we're not very happy about in 30 years time. So that's my encouragement for all of you to click into the link and take a look at what the UN SDGs look like, and see if there's any relation that might be possible for you to link the two together. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks for explaining that, Dora. So obviously the pressures are causing policy changes, regulation changes. At the same time, we have technological changes. Are you seeing any either emerging technologies or at least newer technologies that are starting to have some strong promise for being applied in sustainability space?
I think those would probably, like, the use of blockchain would actually be more towards what my perception of things. Initially, when you asked that question, one that popped up is like, I guess you call it like a deep technology, but the concept of like carbon captures, which I think is something that's also very controversial right now, because even though it like we talk about carbon capturing not in a natural sense as well, but in more of a technological sense. Like, I think right now, I think James would probably be better able to answer this, but it just doesn't, the numbers just don't make sense for the concepts of like carbon captures. But when you talk about blockchain for transparency, and I think lately in the carbon credit perspective of things, a lot of companies are using blockchain to really be able to trace and track where the credits are coming from, because I think that used to be one very big issue in the past of people buying plots of land and then double selling it so that people don't actually own the credits that they say they own, and so forth. So yeah, I think on a tech perspective, blockchain, but I also want to encourage, I guess, going back to, I think now in the decarbonization perspective of things as well, there's a lot of talk about nature-based solutions, right? So I would say maybe take a look back at nature, at what it's already capable of doing, and seeing how technology can be used to enhance that, rather than, totally use it and use technology instead of what's already available in a natural perspective. Yeah.
James, do you want to add on to that?
Yeah, I think Dora covered it quite well. I think there's really two key areas. The first area is the development of carbon credits. We are starting to see a lot of tokenization and use of blockchain, and this is really to mitigate, the risk of greenwashing. So I think in the past, with a lot of nature-based sort of carbon credits, there has been a lot of backlash when it comes to, the methodology that they use. It's based on random sampling, and there's just a lot of different sort of wishy-washy, if you will, sort of methodologies to calculate the emissions that have been reduced. We start to see a lot more in terms of, technology along the MRV process. MRV is the process to really verify carbon credits, right? It's measurement and monitoring, it's reporting, and it's validation. So we start to see a lot more tech when it comes to drone technology, remote sensing, and also IoT as well in that area. So that's really on the carbon credit space. When it comes to actual decarbonizing your value chain, what we start to see is a lot around energy efficiency. So we start to see energy efficiency and a lot of sub-metering. So even now at hotels, you will start to see sub-metering at the different rooms of hotels, right? So you can actually go in and see what your carbon footprint has been for 2 nights stay at a particular hotel. The reason for sub-metering as well is that they will start to encompass a lot of AI and also machine learning. So companies will have one centralized energy efficiency dashboard, which also shows their emissions from the different machinery that they use, but also it will use AI and machine learning to try to reduce emissions based on improving energy efficiency. I think those are the key areas that we're starting to see within Thailand and within Southeast Asia as well.
Okay,
Just
great. And oh yeah, go on,
a
Dora.
little add-on for that as well. I think what James said regarding machine learning and AI is also, and I think the big chunk that is a very big opportunity in Thailand is actually the data collection aspect of it as well, because oftentimes, like without the data collection, you have all the algorithms, but without the sufficient amount of data, it's really hard to do that. And I think having previously worked with like in a smart city perspective with some of the provinces in Thailand, you really see that like one very big opportunity for I think a lot of people here when you're looking at digitization is how do you help actually governments be able to collect data points better in their cities so that they can then make better decisions that are more efficient, more effective, and so forth. So I think that's also another big chunk that can help with the sustainability drive in general, because cities are such a, like I think the statistic is like in 2050, like 70% of the world will live in cities, so if you can make that super efficient, then that is a brighter outlook for all of us in general.
Okay, and I think just the very last quick question, I think Sid asked, in Thailand, who do you think will champion anti-greenwashing policies or standards? So we've seen in other countries that this is championed by the government, but what are we expecting to happen in Thailand?
My quick answer to that would be, I think it would be Europe. And
okay.
so they've just issued a new regulation banning greenwashing. So I think it's to start off with whoever is sending things over to Europe. And I think you can search that up. It actually is very clear. It's like if you say it's biodegradable without actually having, clear tests to indicate that they are biodegradable, then you can't use those words. So there's a list of words that you cannot use.
Yeah.
So I think, if you're trying to export, then that's probably the main driver so far. But I'm not too sure. I think in Thailand, there still needs to be a lot of education for all of the corporations in general so that they also understand that what they're doing is greenwashing. Because I think one thing I always hope I say, and I really hope that it's true, is people don't greenwash intentionally. I think a lot of the times is that they don't really know that what they're doing is greenwashing. And that's why they do it. So, but hopefully through education, we can really reduce that number down so that people are more aware of that.
Awesome. Well, that is all we have time for. So thank you both so much for a really insightful discussion. I think I've learned a lot. Hopefully everyone else has as well. So, thank you again. Yeah, I think if there's any follow-up questions, we can capture that afterwards and share a bit of a summary for everyone after this. So again, thank you guys for joining us. Yeah, we'll be launching our next Tech Talk in around 4 to 6 weeks time. So look out for that invite. Thank you, everyone.